Welcome to TYT Interviews. I'm Anna Kasparian, and I have to say, this is an interview that I think is one of the best parts of doing what I do because you are such an incredibly fascinating person. I'm here with Shaka Senghor, and he is a lecturer, an author, and also someone who's pushing very aggressively to reform our justice system. And he just recently wrote a book called Righting My Wrongs, Life, Death, and Redemption in an American Prison. It's a memoir that talks about your experience in our justice system. You were sentenced to 19 years in prison for murder, and you were sentenced when you were 19 years old. And your story is so incredible, especially when you consider the fact that our justice system has moved from a system that's supposed to be about rehabilitation, as well as, you know, taking punitive measures, to being completely punitive and that's it. And you experienced some of the punitive behavior of our justice system when you spent 4.5 consecutive years in solitary confinement. So I have so many questions to ask you, but first, thank you. Thank you for being here.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. I think it's one of the most important conversations we could be having, especially given the climate that we're in right now. So it's an honor to be here. I appreciate it.
Let's start at the beginning. You actually started out in life in a good spot. You were an honor roll student, you were doing well in school, and then your parents split up and things kind of took a turn for the worst.
Yeah, I grew up in the city of Detroit, east side, in a neighborhood that was pretty much like a model for working in middle class Black America. My father was military, was in the Air Force, worked for the state. My mother was a homemaker, you know, and unfortunately and tragically, like many of the young men and women who end up in the streets, there was some abuse taking place in the home, and I decided that I should run away. And I was so naive, you know, I thought that I would run away and somebody would see this cute little adorable kid and wrap me up in the love and warmth that I think all children deserve. And unfortunately, that wasn't, you know, the reality. And I ended up getting seduced into drug culture, which is what typically happens when you have young, vulnerable teenagers looking for love and looking for shelter and clothing and things like that.
You got involved in drug dealing, and how did that come about? So tell me, what was a pivotal moment that kind of led you to entering that life?
Yeah, so I had been basically a transient homeless teenager for about 2 or 3 weeks. No means to take care of myself. And the older guy, he seized upon that moment and recognized that there was an opportunity there. And once I got into the culture, I realized how kids are recruited into it. But when it was happening to me, I didn't really recognize the signs that was going on. And this was like the beginning of the crack era, so it wasn't like the very obvious signs of like how devastating this drug would be to a community, how it would transform my young life and the lives of many other young men that I grew up alongside. And so that was the entry point into the culture. And then once I got sucked into it, the culture itself is addictive. It is as addictive as the drug itself. And so once I got pulled into that culture, it was really hard to, you know, navigate my way out of that.
So tell me about the crime that you were eventually convicted of. You were 19 years old when you were convicted of murdering someone. I believe you shot him to death.
Yes.
So tell me the details about that, because it's just incredible to hear a story like that and then sit next to someone who is doing so many great things for society. And I think it's important to detail your dark past because you're an example of how rehabilitation is important and there is redemption in people's lives. But
yeah, but it's really one of the reasons I wrote the book. So typically what happens is somebody gets murdered and then there's this scary picture placed on the news of the person who's responsible, and that's kind of the end of the story. It typically goes away as fast as it appears. And what I wanted to do was leave a lasting impression on American society about what's actually really happening to so many of the young men and women growing up in these communities where there's high levels of gun violence. And it's part of it is because I recognize the cycle and the pattern. So my first encounter with gun violence occurred at a very early age, like around 14. My childhood friend was murdered. Then 2 of my brothers were shot, and then eventually I was shot at the age of 17.
Jeez.
And throughout these different experiences, there was never any access to counseling. Nobody to intervene and say, hey, that was a very traumatic thing you experienced. You should really get some help. And so basically, after I got shot, I was left to kind of navigate through this volatile cocktail of emotions, the anger, the fear, the paranoia. And what I did is I began to carry a gun every day. And it didn't matter what I was doing, eating, drinking, using the restroom. I always had a gun nearby because I actually feared for my life. And I didn't recognize that I was suffering from what I believe to be PTSD. And I think it's common, you think about a city like Chicago and a city like Detroit, we have extremely high levels of homicides and gun violence. It's largely because the pattern is repeating itself.
Right.
And so 16 months after I got shot, I was carrying a gun, which is one of the poorest decisions I've made in my young life. And I got into a conflict, a drug transaction, where it was a guy that I knew I had sold drugs to in the past. He brought some people that I didn't know, and I refused to sell him drugs. And that caused an argument to escalate, and we got to arguing, and the passenger joined into the argument. And instead of walking away, which, is one of the things about having been convicted of homicide is like, that's something that never goes away. Like, you can replace somebody if you rob them, you can apologize if you just did something mean to them, but you can never bring a life back. Mm-hmm. And so there's always these moments where I think about, what if I would have just walked away? And obviously, 20-something plus years later, it's easy to be able to exercise that wisdom. But at that point in my life, I was just really caught up in this very volatile environment, in a mindset. And so I fired several shots and tragically caused his death. And I was subsequently arrested, charged with open murder, and convicted and sentenced for second-degree murder to a total of 17 to 40 years, but I actually served 19 years.
You served 19 years. Wow. So talk to me a little bit about what that trial was like. Do you feel like you were properly represented? Because one of the issues that you see in a lot of cases right now is someone will see the suspect as a young black man, and immediately there's assumptions. There's stereotypes, there's bias, and there are some members of society that want to deny that bias plays a role, but it certainly does in our justice system. Now, in your case, you confess that you did it, but do you feel like you were given the proper defense attorney, given the proper opportunity to at least negotiate a sentence that made sense? You were young, you were 19 years old.
No, my attorney, which is typical, typically happens, is that they come in and they make all these promises of making sure you don't get sent to prison for the rest of your life, or sent for a time period beyond what you can imagine at that age. And so they tell you, hey, well, the judge will give you 10 years, or you're young, et cetera, et cetera. So I had horrible legal representation. And it was one of the things that led me to actually working in the law library when I got in prison, is because I wanted to ensure that other, young men who were dealing with legal issues knew what their rights were.
Right.
And that they can protect themselves when they're dealing with legal counsel. Because the way our system is structured is we don't give people the quality of legal representation that any human being should deserve when they're being accused of something. And so what happens is you get scared, poor kids who have mothers and fathers who are completely clueless about the judicial system. And when you wrap that up in the racial dynamics, especially from the generation prior to mine, where there was this whole idea of being fearful of the system and not challenging the system and just accepting that this is how it is, you get these astronomical numbers of people who have been basically coerced into going to prison because they just don't know how to represent themselves legally.
Yeah, I mean, there have been numerous cases of people who have been exonerated because DNA evidence found that they actually were not guilty of the crime they were convicted of. And in a lot of those cases, they actually confessed to the crime that they did not commit, and it's because of the coercion that you're kind of talking about right now. And so that's one of the many things that we need to see some reform in when it comes to our justice system. So let's move on to your sentence. You were sentenced to 17 to 40 years, but you served 19. what really stood out to me about your sentence was the amount of time you spent in solitary confinement. So you spent 4.5 consecutive years in solitary, and then in total 7 years of your full 19 years in prison. So talk to me about why you were placed in solitary confinement. I mean, you would think of these individuals as, you know, the most dangerous, who need to be separated from everyone else. Like, what led you to being put there?
So I went a couple of times for fights, altercations in prison. I mean, prison is a very volatile environment, and found myself getting into different conflicts and breaking the rules. And I wasn't like, and I want to be very clear because I think it's important. Like, I didn't go in as the model guy who was intentional about following all the rules. Like, I broke every rule that they basically had in prison because I was angry, I was frustrated, I was emotionally immature, and it was a very traumatic experience. And so I reacted to that environment based on the norms of the environment and the neighborhoods that I had come from. But the last time I was in solitary with the 4.5 years, it's one of the sore points in my life, because it was an experience that I see play out all the time, you know, when you watch the police brutality. And I got into a conflict with an officer who had a reputation for abusing his authority by crossing the line and putting his hands on guys in inappropriate manners. And so when he and I got into a conflict, he put his hands on me, and then I beat him up, and they sent me to solitary confinement indefinitely. Wow. And so they don't tell you, like, you know, you do 60 days, we'll let you out, or 90 days, we'll let you out. It's an indefinite sentence. And in fact, they told me I would probably never get out of solitary confinement, let alone get out of prison, because they take assaults on staff, you know, very serious in there. So, you know, the thing about that experience is I was blessed. You know, I was fortunate to be literate enough to know and understand what the environment was designed to do. And what it did for me on some levels, outside of just my personal, what I chose to do at that time, I want to be very clear, like, the environment doesn't fix anything. It's the choices you make when you're in an environment. And so I made conscious choices to turn my life around, but one of the things that was a major driver is the level of abuse that I saw, you know, taking place. And what a lot of people in American society don't realize is that some of the most vulnerable men and women are in solitary confinement. These are men and women who are suffering from mental illness, who have a whole range of psychiatric problems that we refuse to deal with because we won't acknowledge that they actually exist. And so it's hard for them to coexist in general population, and they end up going to solitary confinement for minor infractions, and they'll have their sentences extended over and over because they are accused of breaking the rules. But the thing about the rules is they make sense to people who don't have mental illness. And if you have paranoid schizophrenia and you think somebody's in your cell, it may be logical for you to kick on your cell door to try to get out. And the way that the officers react is to punish further instead of get treatment. And so I knew I couldn't leave that environment and not give a voice to their plight. You know, like, I'm very passionate about that space, you know, and I mean, I was fortunate. I didn't leave with any psychiatric issues, but
How? You were in solitary confinement consecutively for 4.5 years. Solitary confinement it's been used as methods of torture by the Soviets, for instance. And so you were in there for so many years without, you know, real human interaction. How did you remain so resilient?
Well,
what kept you going?
Reading. Reading stories of men and women who had overcome obstacles and adversity in their own lives, and who found ways to tap into that inner strength. You know, meditation, writing. For me, I started journaling because I really wanted to get to the root of how I went from this kid with dreams of being a doctor to serving out my most promising years in a prison cell. So I started writing, I started journaling, and really kind of unpacking a lot of that baggage. But reading was the saving grace for me. There's this book I read called Cages of Steel, which outlines how solitary confinement is designed to destroy a human's sense of self, like sense of your own power, because it makes you so reliable reliant on the officers in the environment. And then when they're combative or they're antagonistic, you know, it breaks down, you know, your understanding of what it means to interact humanly. But knowing all these different things, whenever I would see signs that I was, you know, possibly being affected by the environment, I knew how to self-correct. And basically what I would do is I would just pick up, you know, a book by Mandela and read something that he had written, or, you know, Asada Shakur or Malcolm or somebody who had gone through some things. And I would just pick it up and just extract their wisdom, and that was enough to get me through those moments. But had I not been literate, which a lot of the population in prison isn't, then there's no telling what would have happened. I mean, you think of somebody like Khalif Browder, this young kid who was in solitary for 2 years, and he came home and he was still being impacted to the point that he committed suicide. And that's a common reality for people. Like, I mean, I've saw guys that just will cut themselves up with anything they can get their hands on just so they can go to the hospital and get touched by a nurse, to have somebody hold their hand, to have somebody show them some type of human compassion. And so, you know, when you see that, and you know, I knew that I didn't want to leave prison like that. And so I just fought every day, and it was a daily battle to come out on the other side of that.
Wow. That's amazing. So I want to touch a little bit on, sorry, I didn't think I'd get all emotional, but that shows how powerful, you know, you are and how powerful your mind is. And, you know, we talk about knowledge is power, you know, and in this context, you know, just being able to read and just being able to understand what's happening to you emotionally as you're going through this, kind of saved your life, you know. And now that you're out of prison and, you know, you're doing really inspiring work and you're giving lectures, you're doing TED Talks, you're working to reform the prison system and our justice system, do you ever have moments of maybe PTSD or mental health issues as a result of what you went through?
What I realized when I first wrote Righting My Wrongs, you know, it was a very difficult book to write. It was very personal. I talked about things that I had never discussed publicly with anybody. And, you know, I knew that I was taking a major risk with writing a book that was so personal and so much pain wrapped in it. From just, you know, my childhood experiences, things I had gone through, you know, the things I went through in prison. And so when I first started talking about the book itself, I was doing interviews, and I realized that I was re-traumatizing myself over and over. And, you know, I became a little anxious and, you know, less patient with people. And when I realized what was happening, I was like, okay, I need to just step back and kind of think about the purpose. What is the intentions, right? What do I want to happen with the book? And, you know, and I just thought about my friends. You know, like, you know, I have friends in prison. I have my mentors are in prison. Some of the best mentors in the world. You know, these guys gave me, you know, a sense of hope and purpose when nobody else would. You know, they provided me with the books that challenged me to think and changed my mind. And, you know, whenever I had those moments, I'm reminded that, you know, I have friends who are relying on me to, you know, share their story, because my story is their story. Like, I'm not an anomaly. I'm not the smartest guy to come out of the prison. I'm not the best writer to ever come out of prison. And, you know, I know that these men exist because I lived with them for years. And so I just knew that I had to keep, you know, pushing ahead. And it's hard. I mean, there are days when, you know, it's small things that people take for granted that I see in a very different way, you know.
So let's talk about how you were in one of the most non-rehabilitative places imaginable, and you were rehabilitated, and it was mostly because of your own conviction, and it was because of, you know, yourself and what your own personal goals were. Do you see that as a possibility for other inmates? I mean, I'm sure there are other inmates who have been rehabilitated, even given the fact that there's so much widespread abuse in our prison systems. I mean, we have members of Congress who refuse to address issues like prison rape because they think of prisoners as throwaways, regardless of what they're in there for. If it's drug possession, who cares? Same as murder, same as whatever. I mean, do you see prison as rehabilitative at all right now?
Sadly and unfortunately, I don't. You know, and to me, I always look at it like this: when somebody comes out of prison and commits a crime, I don't think that they should be the only ones to shoulder the burden of that responsibility. Because we as a society has failed to put in the safeguards to ensure that men and women are coming home healthy and whole. And if you're going to incarcerate over 2 million human beings, 2 million citizens of our country are currently incarcerated, and just allow them to languish away in prison, to me that's criminal. And I think the policies that are in place that don't speak to our rehabilitation, don't think about transformation, I think those are criminal because we have the knowledge that we can do something different, that we can do something smarter, wiser. And it's another one of the reasons I wrote the book. Like, I wanted to show people that if you provide just a glimmer of hope and a little bit of love and care, that you can produce different outcomes. You know, there was moments in my incarceration where I had succumbed to the brutality and accepted that as the way that the world was, and I was cynical and I was angry and I was bitter. But once somebody provided me with light, with just a little bit of hope, and I knew that there can be a different outcome, then I started putting forth the effort to make sure that I produced a different outcome. And I think that we can do that. I don't think that it's that hard, actually. When I first went to prison, we had access to higher education. And then during the Clinton administration, they passed the crime bill that changed all that. I was averaging 4.0 at that time. And this was the first time that I felt accomplished from an educational standpoint. And then I have that snatched away. That was just like slamming the door on hope. And fortunately for me, because I love to learn, I'm curious about the world, I began to structure my days as if I was at university. And so I would study a subject, you know, each hour, and then I would write late into the evening. And so I had a system that worked for me that was self-initiated, but I think that that can be the norm. But it starts with really being able to reach people where they are, because the way that my mentors got to me, actually, they tried the old model of the scared straight, oh, you're gonna mess their life up, you're never gonna get out of prison. But at 19, looking at 2 decades, I thought I was gonna die in prison anyway. And so what they did is they noticed that I like to read, and they found a way to connect with me around what I like to read. Like, I started off reading Donald Goines and Iceberg Slim, books about pimps and drug dealers, because that appealed to my logic at the time.
Right.
But what they did is they saw that I loved to read, so they started guiding me toward different books and started challenging me on ideas. And we just live in a system that we think that you can just fix everything with one paintbrush, and you can't. Like, you really have to speak to the unique circumstances under which men and women exist.
So you were released in 2010, and I kind of want to get to where you are today, because the work that you're doing today is so important. And
Thank you.
you know, for all those people out there who think it's, you know, a waste of resources to focus on rehabilitation rather than punitive measures, well, here's a success story, and you're inspiring people.
Thank you.
So you were released in 2010, and since then, you've done amazing things. And I just want to note that for a lot of people who have served their time, they've paid, you know, the consequences for their crimes and should be allowed to go back into society and be productive members of society, they usually get stopped from achieving their dreams because employers get to ask you whether or not you've ever been convicted. They get to deny you employment as a result of that. Discrimination against anyone who's ever been convicted of a crime is widely accepted. But you have managed to succeed and do amazing things. So tell me what it was like after your release.
Well, it was like everything you just said.
Yeah.
People denied me employment. I was denied housing because I have a felony. It's one of the things that I don't think the American public knows, that you can legally be discriminated against when it comes to finding the most fundamental thing to build your life over, which is a home or an apartment. I dealt with multiple rejections in the employment space. I've never had a regular job since I've been out. I've been out for 7 years. I've had a lot of contractual work because that was the best that people were willing to offer, or what they could afford to offer, because they were small companies just getting started. And so I ran into all those obstacles. And what it did is it made me fight harder and work harder, because I really wanted to prove the point that, you know, we are redeemable, and that can be different outcomes, and we can produce them, but it has to be collaborative. And I'm fortunate, I know a lot of wonderful people who were willing to give me a chance. It wasn't in the typical put an application and I'll employ you, but there were other opportunities that they allowed me access to, and they gave me opportunity to just prove my self-worth. They didn't do me any favors or give me any kind of pass because I was formerly incarcerated. They just gave me opportunity to prove that I can do the work and that I was capable. And I think that's all any of us ask for, is give me an opportunity to compete like anybody else if you want me to stay free.
So what was your first job, paid gig after prison?
So my first paid gig I actually created myself because I opened up a Facebook account the first day I got home, and I heard about this Facebook thing. I opened an account, and one of the things that I wrote was that I was interested in reviewing music from any local artist. And really, I just wanted to listen to the new music and get caught up. And it was an opportunity to keep my writing skills sharp. And one of the local newspapers was like, well, hey, could you review some music for us? And I did, and then they brought me a check for like $50 or something. And I was like, oh, they pay you for that? They was like, yeah, as many reviews you write. And then one day one of their writers wasn't available, and they asked if I could write a feature-length story. And I was like, sure, I've never written one, but I can. And I ended up writing that story, and it became one of the most popular stories that they had got. And so after that, they hired me. I started writing almost all of the paper, the front page, and so all type of the whole art section. So that opened up doors of opportunity for me to just meet interesting people. And that was kind of like my first employment opportunity. And they brought me on full time for like a week or two, and then they lost the contract that allowed them to pay me. And it was just back to square one, and that was, it was scary.
Yeah.
Because there's something about being gainfully employed that gives you a sense of dignity and a sense of purpose. And especially when you've never had that. When that was taken away, it was a dark period for me. But fortunately, I find things that motivate me and inspire me, and sometimes you have to be intentional in looking for those things.
Yeah, I feel like your nickname should be the initiator. Like, you just initiate great things for yourself. It's incredible. And so I want to kind of close out the interview with talking a little bit about reform. There are so many components of our justice system that do need to be reformed. First off, there's the issue of mandatory minimums and sentencing. That has become more and more of a problem with the emergence of private prisons, who of course have a vested interest to increase sentencing so they can make a buck, off taxpayers, by the way. There's also the issue of abuse in prisons, whether it's sexual abuse or just pure violence by some of the correctional officers that work there. There's the issue of overuse of solitary confinement. There's just so much. What do you focus on? Is it all of it, or is there something that you're really honing in on?
Well, I'm fortunate to work with some incredibly thoughtful and gifted people. One of the organizations that I collaborate with is called Cut 50, which is part of Dream Corps, which was started and founded by Van Jones. And I get a chance to work with Van Jones as well. He's just a brilliant strategist when it comes to problem solving. And so what I realize is that you can't eat the whole elephant by yourself. It takes a team. And we just have to work in the areas that we specialize in. My specialty is really humanizing the issue that people tend to look at strictly in terms of data and statistics. And I feel like my responsibility is to ensure that people recognize there's a face behind these numbers. There's mothers, there's sisters, there's daughters, there's brothers, there's sons that make up these numbers. And what's always interesting, I've traveled all over the country and speaking all over the country, and I meet people who nobody would assume that they've had a family member who is struggling, because not only just the prison part is having a felony, because those are two different things. And we have over 2 million people in prison, but we have millions more who have felonies and who are boxed out of opportunities. So that's the work that I do, is more around that narrative storytelling and helping people see the men and women as human beings who are worthy of redemption and who deserve a second chance. Not because we as society are being soft on them or just not allowing them to accept responsibility, but the fact of the matter is they've served their time. and they deserve to be able to live with dignity and respect that other people live with, especially if we want them to extend that to other people. So
I think any reform when it comes to societal ills needs to appeal to human empathy. And you can't really appeal to human empathy unless you humanize the individuals that are impacted by the kind of injustice that we have in this country. And so, you know, just to kind of close out our conversation, keep in mind that the United States, which is boastful about being the land of the free, actually incarcerates more people than any other country in the world. And so there is a profit model behind that. It is a big business here in the United States. There's a prison industrial complex. And so when you team that up with the legalized bribery that we have in Congress, well, it becomes more and more of a problem. And I love the work that you're doing, and I'm so grateful that you're speaking out, sharing your story, and, you know, honestly putting yourself through a lot by reliving your experiences. So I just want to thank you for it.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. Again, I think that this is one of the most important issues of our time, and it's scary with the current administration because there's been a lot of work put in by, you know, again, organizations like Cut 50 and Dream Corps to work on a bipartisan level to change some things. And it's just scary to think that a lot of our work can be undone because people aren't willing to look into the hearts and soul of human beings who deserve just a little bit of compassion and empathy. And it goes a long way. I'm living proof of that. So Thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Please check out his book, Shaka Senghor, and his book is Righting My Wrongs, Life, Death, and Redemption in an American Prison. So amazing book, amazing conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for watching TYT Interviews. We'll see you soon.